Hello, my name is Bhanu Durvasula and I'm with Hughes Network Systems. There's a lot of talk about 5G these days. We're starting to see 5G rollouts in some cities, and there's quite a bit of buzz on the future of how 5G will change our lives. The question and topic of my discussion for today is, what does it mean for people living in rural communities? When you hear about 5G, the first thing that comes to mind are blazing fast speeds that will allow users to download or stream very high definition videos in a matter of seconds. Indeed, 5G will bring gigabits per second to user devices. Homes will have faster broadband connections. People will be able to access the internet while on the move, whether on cars, trains, airplanes, or ships. You'll see more and more applications in virtual and augmented reality. In addition to connecting people, 5G will enable connectivity of billions, if not trillions of devices. This will lead to self-driving cars, which we're already starting to see. There will be smart cities with green and efficient use of energy, smart traffic management, reduced air pollution, better monitoring systems for safety, better sanitation, and many more uses for improving quality of life for people living in urban and suburban areas. 5G will also enable telehealth, precision farming, and many other applications. For network operators, 5G will provide increased efficiencies, reliability, scalability, and security that will significantly cut down on their startup and operating costs. Network functions virtualization, or NFV, and software-defined networks, or SDN, will cut down on the need for hardware and will simplify operations by automating network configuration, routing, and management tasks. This will greatly improve deployment time for new applications or for their network expansion. Okay, so this is all great news for people living in cities and for the service providers. But what will 5G do for people who live in rural communities? Before looking at 5G impact for rural areas, let us look at what may or may not be practical for rural deployments. Spectrum for 5G is will be allocated in three segments. The low band, which covers from 450 megahertz to 1 gigahertz, the mid band, which covers from 1 gigahertz to 7 gigahertz, and the higher millimeter wave frequency band, which covers from 24 gigahertz to 52 gigahertz. On the high end of the spectrum, in the millimeter wave bands, use of massive multiple input, multiple output, or massive MIMO and beamforming RF technology allows top 5G speeds that can go up to 10 gigabits per second. However, the coverage from one cell site is limited and will be less than a mile. This means a large number of cell sites will be required to provide coverage in a given city. Operation in mid-band frequencies can provide speeds up to 1 Gbps, and a cell site will be able to cover anywhere from 5 to 10 miles. On the low end or the low band frequencies, a cell site can provide coverage up to 20 miles, but the speeds will be only moderately better than LTE speeds and can go up to 250 megabits per second. The low and mid bands are best suited for remote areas given the lower population density and wider geographic spread, not to mention the high cost of deploying many required cell sites for operation in the millimeter wave frequencies. Okay, so before I go into 5G implications for rural areas, let us look at the current situation. Today, there are around 3.2 billion people, or about 40% of the world population, that have no broadband internet access. Most of these people live in rural areas. Connectivity there is mostly 2G or 3G, or maybe no service at all. Within the rural areas, you have underserved and unserved locations. For the underserved, the speeds are very limited, and most go up to 25 megabits per second. Some have access via terrestrial cellular towers, but with weak signals, or they may have satellite-based connectivity. The unserved are typically very distant villages where there is no terrestrial coverage or possibility of that, and satellite connectivity can be the only option. Migration to LTE is just starting in remote areas and is very slow going, as MNOs do not find it profitable to deploy in these regions. Given that LTE deployments are just starting in rural areas, it will be a few years before we can think of having 5G there. When 5G does arrive, it will not be that dramatic as impact that will be seen when it does arrive in urban areas. Also, it will not be as dramatic for these remote regions, when they go from 2G and 3G to LTE. Given the economics, the rollouts will certainly be in low or mid 5G bands. The speeds as compared to LTE will be moderately higher, and applications also will be more incremental. I don't think there'll be millimeter wave and gigabit speeds, in remote areas for many, many years. With ongoing LTE deployments, we are already seeing some major benefit to rural communities. These will be enhanced eventually with 5G. Foremost, broadband access will start bridging the digital divide for school-going children. Kids will have access to good quality teachers and education and a wealth of educational resources. They'll be able to interact with their urban peers and participate in many learning activities. Education through this connectivity will also be very affordable. In addition to school children, broadband access will provide an opportunity for adults to learn as well. Telehealth will significantly improve health and well-being for people who have very limited access to doctors. With telehealth, doctors will be able to receive high-resolution images for use in diagnosis and treatment, and may even be able to manipulate surgical instruments many miles away. People will also have access to specialized health professionals that are today, largely limited to urban areas. For example, for mental health issues and so on. E-commerce will allow villagers to sell their goods, whether it's agricultural products, handicrafts, or other goods, by eliminating middlemen and, for them to have higher margins. They will have access to banks as well as, financing. Another upcoming major application for rural areas is precision agriculture. It uses technology and farm equipment along with GPS systems, artificial intelligence, and real-time data collection to support a range of activities. Sensors measure things like water level and soil status, or analyze crop health. Imagery can optimize crop placement and improve yield. In 2019, the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimated an 18% increase in farm production with the addition of rural broadband. Last but not least is access to entertainment and social media, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, or other popular social media services. People will be able to enjoy similar forms of entertainment as their counterparts do in the cities. The big question for 5G in rural areas is whether mobile network operators are willing to invest in these places. The chart on the right shows that 50% of their revenues come from just 10% of the sites, and that 80% of the total revenue is from 30% of the sites, with all these being in urban and suburban areas. Also, the 50% of sites which are in rural areas provide less than 10% of their revenue. So clearly, investing in rural areas has not been profitable for MNOs and really no incentives for them to go there. Well, that's now starting to change. New government mandates are forcing MNOs to rethink. In Brazil, for example, there's a 5G spectrum auction that started last week and ongoing. For a company to win big and get that spectrum, they have an obligation to provide LTE services in remote areas. To cut down capital and operational costs, MNOs have multiple options. With 5G and Open RAN split architecture choices, MNOs can minimize the equipment at site. For example, the distributed unit of the 5G base station, which is responsible for real-time functions, can be located at the remote site, while the central unit of the base station, which is responsible for non-real-time and higher layer functions, can be on the network side. This way, the centralized unit can support multiple distributed units, cutting down on per-site costs. Other approaches for cost cutting will be for MNOs to jointly operate at a remote site with the 3GPP defined shared RAN option. MNOs can also partner with satellite service providers and other ISPs to have them partially or perhaps totally manage the remote site installations and services. In summary, broadband connectivity and 5G will uplift the lives of people in rural communities with better education, health care, and in many other ways to help them to be more productive and enjoy a better quality of life. The migration from 2G and 3G to LTE has just started, and it'll be a few years before we see 5G in rural areas. When 5G does show up, it will most likely be with operation in lower mid-band 5G frequencies and with moderate increase in speeds as compared to LTE. MNOs who have been reluctant to deploy networks in rural areas will be obligated to provide services there, starting with LTE, in order for them to secure 5G spectrum in cities and suburbs. Indeed, the 5G rising tide will lift all boats, including the broadband access for rural people. Thank you.